Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm Brian. I'm the host of the Left of Greg show. You're going to be watching the video version of our audio podcast. Please, guys, if you like the video, like it, subscribe to the channel. There's going to be more content down there if you're already a subscriber, and a better way for us to get you guys some more stuff. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them below. Check out our links down below to get a hold of us and to actually find out more places where you can get more information about this. Please like and subscribe. Follow us on Facebook at HBPRNA. Remember, all these cases that we discuss and all the discussions that we have are through the lenses of what we call human behavior, pattern recognition, and analysis. So please like it, share it, tell your friends about it, and we hope you enjoy the show. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And on that note, I think we will get started for the day.
Welcome. Welcome.
Today, we are going over a few different cases, and we'll be, of course, working in the COVID virus at some point. But those of you listening, remember this is recorded probably a week or so before it actually airs. That being
So
said,
if we're both dead from it, think of the irony.
Yeah, I know.
This will be playing everywhere. We'll be more famous than death.
We have made our way into the top 100 category on iTunes podcasts for, I guess, social sciences, which is funny. I got to check it, so I got to redo it.
Just see that second word to make sure it's not social diseases, man,
yeah,
because you've had an edge in that market for years now.
I'm horrible at any type of social media stuff, so I don't tag stuff correctly or identify, and so it gets thrown in a different category. So we might be like the top in some niche category.
We started in travel and leisure. You see what I'm saying? So that's worked around. And apparently we're pretty hot in the Philippines.
So thank you everyone for.
We're second only to that painting elephant, Marin, in the Philippines, which I think is pretty cool.
That's really cool. That's much cooler.
Really cool.
I would rather, in fact, everyone stop listening to us and go check that.
Right. This is a mega episode anyway.
Anyway, so appreciate everyone out there listening. Thank you so much. Thank you guys who have been going to the Patreon site and checking out our extras. We're always updating that. We got some cool stuff on there coming up too. So thanks for that. If you're listening and enjoy it, please hit the 5-star review button. If you can, scroll down to the details. That would really help us out. But anyway, let's jump right into it today. So we'll start with a case from Minnesota where I'll give kind of loose details of the case, but someone calls 911 about a suicidal male. So the police get a call for service about someone who's suicidal. They have a gun. And they're basically in the street on their knees or sitting down the entire time with this gun, right? So police officers show up. They begin talking to the guy. Obviously, it's a highly emotional situation for him. This guy has a gun to his head with the finger on this trigger pretty much the entire time, naturally moving around. The officers identify themselves, try to talk to him. That's going on for nearly 45 minutes, right? Obviously, there's initial police officers that show up to the scene. Then there's follow-on responding officers who continue to show up to the scene as well. During this time, this guy actually ends up removing the magazine out of his gun. So now they're thinking like, okay, he's got at least a bullet in the chamber. They're trying to talk him down. And then what happens is one of the responding officers, not one of the initial guys that were talking to him, one of the people I believe that was covering the situation, right? Meaning covering with their weapon system in case something happened, and that allows those police officers talking to him to kind of freedom of movement do their job, right? They can talk to him. They know they have a cover officer who's controlling the scene for them, and ends up shooting and killing this man, shooting him multiple times and killing the man who was suicidal. So big question is how does this happen? How does it escalate from a guy who's going through horrible mental health issues, who wants to kill himself, to the police showing up and them being the ones who ended up killing him? Now there's a whole bunch of details and explanations on why that person, everyone has it, hey, this is why I made those decisions. But just to frame it real quickly is how the hell does this happen? Right. Yeah. So how does this guy who's dealing with this situation, wanting to kill himself, you have police officers who show up trying to help him, right? And then some of those police officers that showed up ended up killing him. So how does that happen, Greg? I mean,
well, first of all, let's frame this. This is not a suicide by cop. So take that right off the shelf,
right?
Because
and
we have a panacea of choices.
By suicide by cop, you mean those are sometimes people who are armed, and then they want to die, and they know if I run at a police officer or point a gun at them, they're going to kill me. So it's just
Exactly.
they do it just to be killed.
Yeah. But,
That's what you mean
and
by
remember,
suicide by
there's
cop. Yeah.
there's fear that motivates that sometimes. There's severe mental illness that motivates that sometimes. But we don't know here because the cops killed the best witness. So my point here, and I'm distressed, I'm a little angry, only based on the fact of the logic and lack thereof that went into the choices. So procedurally, there was a lot right here. Up and out, down and in, who was covering who, the availability of less than lethal force weapons, all of that stuff was great. But Brian, I would ask us to rewind a little further left of Bang, no pun intended in this horrific incident, and take a look at what happened. Somebody called saying man with the gun. That just pops everything up to dispatch's most serious column.
Okay.
Coppers on the way already know that the subject is likely armed. So a lot of chemistry starts happening, a lot of emotions start going into play.
And a lot of policies and procedures start to go into play.
Oh yeah. Now the supervisors are taking note, dispatchers know, emergency services are notified, and many times you come and it's a misunderstanding. But guess what? Guns, like even suicide by gun, Brian.
Right.
We're talking serious stuff. You can't unring the bell. You can take some pills and call the hotline, and maybe still have a good chance. You can cut your risk and maybe still have a good chance of coming back from it. But when you pull that trigger, there's very, very likely you're going to have a devastating.
Well, I think it's also a difference too in the fact that it's a weapon that you could hurt or kill someone else.
Yeah. I get that, but that's
meaning
what
I think that's what you're getting at. Is like if I'm going to commit suicide and I throw back a bottle of pills, the response I get from the police or emergencies can be
completely different.
Right.
Completely different.
So even though it's the same mental health situation,
exactly,
two completely different responses based on what this person is decided to do.
The immediacy of the danger, the threat that goes much farther than initial at the ground. So now they get there, and here's a person in a public place. I think this is important as well. When I hurt and I feel, if I, God, I don't want to turn this into, hey, folks, this is how to commit suicide. But the idea is that most of the people that feel like we all do sometimes about committing suicide, you're much more likely to do it in a place in the garage with photos of your family surrounding you, carbon monoxide, or in the tub with the warm water and some music playing and a candle lit. Why? Because it's a very personal thing. It's like William Atkinson's tattoos. He has 100 tattoos, but they're all hidden in places that nobody else would think of. Why? Because they're his. So this guy does it in a public place, which is meaningful because did he want to actually commit suicide?
Right.
Was this the only way he knew of trying to get the help and people to listen to him? We'll never know, okay? Because it's always stupid to grab a gun. Folks at home, there's a lot of other ways. Call those hotline numbers because they'll talk to you all day. Go seek help. Go to an emergency room, unless they have coronavirus. Go to an emergency room and tell them you're feeling suicidal. Why is that important? Because there was other means. But this man, in his mind, had exhausted those and said, I know for certain if I'm holding a gun, they'll show up. He also makes mention, and folks, do your homework, read the case. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
He also makes mention that I'm a first responder, so I know all the tricks that you're going to use. I've been through this before. Again, Brian, frame that. What is he trying to tell us? What psychological message may he be trying to impart? I know that you've got procedures, comma, and those procedures aren't likely to get me killed. So now that I have your attention, do you see what I'm saying?
So that's a really important thing to bring up right here because I didn't mention it because I knew it would come up because now that changes the dynamic of this person.
Sure does.
But again, we're looking at this after the fact. We're not trying to Monday morning quarterback this. We're just explaining the situation. So he is this person with who is wants to commit suicide is a first responder himself, correct?
Yes.
So he actually knows, all right, if I do
policy
this,
and procedure, buddy.
Yeah. So he knows the policies and procedures. And like you just said, that changes it maybe from, is this person really want to kill themselves? Because if he did, he didn't need anyone there to do it. He could have just done it.
And I'm going to be a dick here. I'm going to be a dick and say this. How many times have you seen the Hollywood film? And it's just the same pablum over and over and over. Yeah. But how many times have you seen it where the bad guy and the good guy are finally in their face-off, And it doesn't matter what great technology they had before, it's always going to end up in a fist fight, right?
Right.
But they're right there at the end, and the most critical moment, and the guy goes, now, let me tell you, Mr. Bond, why that we've done it. And he delays all this time, allowing the
Yeah.
cavalry to come in or whatever.
Suspense.
Yeah. But here you got this guy that's saying, I feel like killing myself. I think that's a check in the box. We safely can predict that he has the means and that he went through enough steps to likely show everybody, I'm serious. I may commit suicide at this moment. Again, no armchair quarterback. Now he's got a gun. Now he's got fellow first responders that are around him, and he wants his say, not necessarily his way. The problem is he has his means, which means that around him there's a circle of danger. Okay. And I will acquiesce that even if he shoots himself, depending on where he shoots himself, and there could be an additional involuntary muscle reflex which fires the gun again. For example, single action inline pistol. Do you get what I'm saying, Brian? There's a myriad scientific realities that you have to compare, specifically in the physics realm. So just like holding a grenade, we draw a line around this guy and say, okay, this is our danger zone and this is our safety zone. Danger zone meaning if you get hit, you're going to die. The safety zone meaning, yeah, you might walk away, but you're going to walk with a limp the rest of your life. Now we have a captive audience. That's him thinking. And now the cops go, well, at least he's not going anywhere. Now what do we have, Brian? We have the gift of time and distance. When you tell me that, unless he popped up off of his knees, unless he turns that gat and starts aiming it at somebody, we have a situation where the clock is in your favor. The longer a person doesn't kill themselves, the longer a hostage taker doesn't shoot the hostage, the better it is for the people around them.
Right. I see what you're saying. So you're saying from the responding perspective of how do you handle this situation, time and distance, right? So
and time is on your side.
What you are also doing is explaining the part about why this is different than someone the guy on the bridge who's going to jump off is different than a guy standing there holding a gun, right? It's like we said, he has a gun. So yeah, he could not even unintentionally kill or seriously injure someone while he's in this distress period, could fire around, he could kill a police officer, could kill a neighbor, a kid, whatever. Like
exactly.
So there's it's not just that the danger isn't just to him, it's
the
to
danger to the public at large. You're exactly right, Brian.
That has to,
and he doesn't have that right, Brian. He does not have the right to do
no
what
one
he
does.
Doing. So one, it's illegal. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But two, as a human being, you should never place anybody else in this type of scenario. But again, we're not talking about a completely sane, rational human at this point. Folks, don't write me letters. What I'm saying is this is a damaged, fractured human that's acting out because he thinks he's at a pun intended dead end. And what he wants is help. What he wants is somebody to listen to him. And that's why he's sparring with them at the beginning. Because if he didn't, Brian, if he just wanted an audience, when they showed up, he'd say, welcome to my suicide, bang, and he's done. He didn't. For every second, for every minute that they were negotiating, that meant that he was sparring with them, that he was talking to them. And the longer that goes, it's always in your favor. The less likely he's going to kill himself or another.
So, and we always say it is some people want their, say, not necessarily their way, right? So
exactly
people that act out, lash out, or do kill themselves without making a scene, those are the people that want their way, whether that's the school shooter or the suicide. Most people just want their say. That's what everyone does, right? I'm going to get on social media. I'm going to tell everyone how I feel. I want to yell and scream. I'm going to be the big guy, acting all tough somewhere, but I don't actually want to do anything necessarily. So that can be difficult to determine, especially in the moment, but not if you know how to identify it, right? So how do you balance that? Meaning you're standing there going, all right, this guy, clearly he's talking. Clearly we've been here for, I think, over 45 minutes. They were on scene before he was killed. That's a long time to be sitting there in the street talking to someone, right? So if he just wants his say and he wants all these people around, we have to factor in the point that, well, he does still have a loaded weapon and he is still potentially very dangerous to the people who showed up to help him and to the community at large, right? So they're walking that fine line. What are they supposed to do? Because what happened was, for some reason, an officer decided that he was now a threat and killed him and shot him multiple times.
But let's not go there yet, Brian. Let's back off just a second and talk about your time issue, because I think that's a great, for example, let's talk about a traffic stop. the U.S. Supreme Court has stated that during a traffic stop, time doesn't matter if the probable cause is still there, and if you're actively searching for information to exculpatory information, no, this is the wrong car. Inculpatory information, listen, I think I've got something here, and I just got to wait till Wyoming Department of Motor Vehicle calls me back, or I talk to that Florida detective and see if this is my witness or suspect. So time is in your favor unless you're wasting time and you just don't have a caper and you're trying to invent one. Then the U.S. Supreme Court, and every mistake in law enforcement comes down to supervisory leadership and lack of training. So if we put that in the same element, the same frame of focus here, what's the right time on a suicide call? I'll tell you right now, if I was a supervisor on the scene, these guys are on that scene until they tell me they need to switch out. I'll have a backup team that's ready to go. I'll have EMS on standby, and I'd already be on the phone going, hey, you got anybody in a hospital that's a psychologist that can come down and start talking to this guy? So 45 minutes doesn't matter to me. If it's 4.5 hours, if it goes into the next day, what value in a life, Brian? I mean, clearly our plan B here can't be to let him go. We can't just say, listen, you're on your own. You know what I'm saying? Good luck to you. We can't, because he's a threat to the greater public, right? But by the same token, as long as he's talking, he's not doing. So clearly he wants something. And this is the art of the negotiation. Now, what is it that you want? What can we get you? What are the steps we can take to de-escalate this right now? And if you're going to say no, then perhaps we have to up the ante and use less than lethal to try to disarm you. But that's a hell of a choice, isn't it? I mean, there's got to be some point. So, is it near a school? Is it near a major road? What are the elements?
You brought up a bunch of. You brought up the major point in a lot of these issues. One of the major points is, how do you respond? What are we supposed to do? Because it's like, hey, those police officers, fire department, supervisor, all those people, like, hey, I got shift change. This is a job. I've got an end of this day. I'm not paying OT. Then the city's going, we're not paying you overtime. So when your time is done, your time to go. So they have to.
I got 2 cars, 4 guys.
But they got pressure from the community and society at large to, hey, why aren't you closing these cases? Why is this not solved yet? Why? And
I got to go to work, and you're in my way.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Everyone on that block was. If that had lasted, they were like, oh, hey, man, I got to go to work. It's like, you haven't. Well, what do you? So this plays into society says they want this. But then the realities are, well, look, man, this is the job. I've got time. We can't sit here all night. We have other people. We have more important things. Look, there may be a structure fire on the other side of town, and these EMS guys have to go help those people out. They can't be sitting.
Precisely, because they're tied up here. That's a resource I can't use elsewhere. But Brian, what's the human life worth? So if we were talking about a guy in a business that was barricaded up, and there's a language difficulty, and it's going to take me 45 minutes to get a Vietnamese interpreter down here, so I further understand this guy is not trying to kill anybody. He's just, wanting political asylum. Let's say that was the issue. We would grant that 45 minutes. If we were saying, now we got it different if it's a ticking clock and a guy says something stupid like, hey, I already killed a hostage and I'm going to kill him on time. Hey, there's an entry. That's a SWAT thing. There's also,
those are clear cut almost. You know what I mean?
But remember, this is a clear cut case. The guy is surrounded by cops. The only person he wants to hurt is himself. And he's only got a handgun. He doesn't have a repeating firearm. And the argument's going to be, but he may have had 2 handguns or 4 magazines. Yeah, okay, but listen, if you can't kill this guy, do you get what I'm trying to say? Well, you sort of have the dynamism here, where if you can't kill this guy, who can you kill? So what I'm saying is that now if we look at what happened, listen, Brian, I would be completely okay with this. I'd still be wrong. Don't take me at my word, folks. Take what I'm trying to tell you. I would be completely okay if they changed the stakes and brought in a police shooter and he tried to shoot the weapon out of the guy's hand, or they had a de-escalation taser that was aimed specifically to, or somebody snuck up and wedge. None of those are good ideas, folks, but let's say that's what they tried, and at least they told the public, listen, we didn't want the guy hurting himself. The school was about to start. We didn't want a parent getting killed, so we thought that maybe we would try these other things, and they failed. I would be okay talking about that, because even those are they're dumb, uninformed choices. At least it wasn't the dumbest thing that I've heard this year, which is I calculated where the muzzle was, and I figured I was over there, and that bullet coming out at 900 feet per second to 1,600 feet per second, let's say, is going to go through this guy's skull after he kills himself, continue on, and threaten me.
Yeah.
So based on that calculus, Brian, based on the trajectory, geometry, internal, external, and terminal ballistic, of which this copper obviously was a scientist, he shot. And Brian, I'll say a couple of things here. One, could have been accidental, and he's covering his ass. Second thing is, people are going, yeah, but then why did he shoot? Because when you shoot, you keep
You
shooting.
shoot. Well,
You get what
yeah.
I'm saying? And then the other people around him, I give them
Surprised no one
a
else
great
did.
deal of pride.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they would have shot. So Brian, let's break that down. And I apologize.
So
Apparently, there's an earthquake
yeah.
here.
So
Right, let's break that down and talk about
so
how
real
the
quick,
hell do
because
you come there?
that's what happened. So now
That's
the
exactly what
police
happened.
officer who killed this man, who's now referred to as defendant in the statement that in the facts
Will
of the
the
case,
defendant please rise? That's what he's
because
hearing.
it's he said he fired based on what you just said. All of a sudden he's holding it to his head, but holding a gun to his head. The person was holding a gun to his head. Evans was his name. Sorry, this guy, Mr. Evans, holding a gun to his head, turned enough so now that if he fired around, the bullet could travel through his head and hit an officer.
Behind
So
cover.
rather than risking that, he decided to shoot him. Shot him once. He slumped to the ground. He was still holding the gun to his head,
And the weapon was
and
still moving in the direction, according to the witness.
the weapon apparently was still moving. So he shot him, I think, 3 more times after that. So your description is what basically he said. I kind of wanted to read it verbatim.
Yeah, let's do it because it's his words, folks.
Yeah,
His words.
In a recorded statement played to the grand jury, the defendant stated Mr. Evans turned his head further than it has, and this is quotation, further than it has in the past to where it's for sure at me. And I felt that it was even past me at Ramos, who was another officer at the scene. So I fired. I just fired. Okay. Those words are extremely powerful.
Especially
that,
that last
that
sentence.
last part.
Fired,
I just fired.
Yep.
That's I don't think that would give me artifacts and evidence to support your claim that it might have been accidental, and he fired and then went, I don't know.
Now what do I do?
Now what do I do?
So I can't be the idiot that accidentally fired. So I got to put some. Hey, listen, there's logic here. My ego tells me that I can sell this story. And Brian, let me ask you a question. Have you ever held a pistol at arm's length for 45 minutes?
No.
You shoot more than anybody I know.
No,
the only person
you'd be able to do that. So
the only person I know that shoots more than you is Nico, and with his threadbare arms, I don't think anybody can keep that up. So it's likely to assume that at some point you're aiming when the gun comes close and stuff. But at this 45-minute mark, Brian, all of a sudden he says, "I fired, comma, I just fired," in his own words. I think that's powerful. I think he cranks off a round. He's thinking there's a lot of stress that's going. It's as logical as his argument that the bullet is somehow now threatening him.
So then, he said, he kind of
can't unring it.
Mr. Evans, the person who was killed, kind of goes limp and falls over. Still has a gun, to his head. Officers start moving forward him. Mr. Evans, the one who's dead, didn't comply with commands to drop his gun, and according to the defendant's statement, this is a quote, the gun falls out, and we're kind of like, around him. The gun falls out, and it is now starting to point at my other partner, so then I fire again at him.
Now it has nothing to do with the suspect. It's that damn Austrian-made Glock that has a mind of its own. What is this, Stephen King? Are we saying that this is Christine all of a sudden? I'm trying to bring to light that I do not understand where this officer's head was, because the idea is that the penalty for attempting suicide shouldn't be homicide. Now, let's take a look at our caper in Dallas that nobody wants to bring back, and there's got to be a plea deal going behind the scenes somewhere because it hasn't made one iota of news space, right? But a female officer walks in what she thinks is her apartment and gets in a shootout. Brian, accidental. It's not a homicide. Whatever they said, that ain't a homicide. This is a homicide. Now we're talking about a person that knowingly, intentionally fired the first round and then kept saying, it's the gun, it's a threat, and kept pumping rounds into him. Brian, do me a favor. Take me to, and remember, folks, these are legal documents. A person was given his rights and then asked to swear to this testimony. Brian, do me a favor. Go down the page and read the part where the guy says, at which point the defendant, or the victim rather, said, I'm going to kill you cops, and I swear to God, and pointed at him. Where is that, Brian, in that testimony?
It's not in there at all.
And isn't that kind of conspicuous that it's not there? You think I'm saying this is a bad cop? I'm saying this is a cop that made the ultimate mistake. I'm saying this cop didn't have the leadership or the training to be in that situation, and he cared for his partner, and he cared for himself, and he extrapolated this math that I still don't get.
And so let's keep it at that right there, because it's important on how we break down these cases. Is
No,
this
of
isn't a
course it is.
bad person or
Nope.
a bad, maybe, I don't know anything about
He
this
didn't
police
say, "Hey,
officer did it.
screw this guy. I hate EMS.
Right,
We're
right.
shooting him." No,
Yeah.
it never entered into his mind.
And all of these, most of these, almost every single one of cases like this come down to, it's just someone made a poor decision, a failure in human performance, right? So
Yeah.
that critical thinking skill wasn't there.
But it ended in his death or in the death of another or many
Yes,
others.
yeah,
you're right.
and this is what happens in all of these, and it's just the lack of critical thinking ability to how to articulate the situation and
Yes.
respond accordingly. You get different cases where some people are hyper alert and overly reactive,
Yep.
or the other end of it where they're not alert and completely unresponsive, that leads to their death or someone else's death,
You're
right?
exactly right.
And that's just that comes down to cognitive performance and what they're actually thinking. But what if these things continue to happen, and they're going to continue to happen, and then we establish policies and procedures and go, okay, well, the next time we're going to do a minimum distance and this person will be at the scene,
Exactly.
which are tactical, tactics,
Knee-jerk
techniques, and
reactions that come
procedures
out.
that don't prevent the next one, right?
Nope.
Because we fail to take the lessons learned. Everyone does,
Exactly
oh, that
right.
guy sucks, he makes other cops look bad, or this is BS, and then everyone goes, F this guy, and they boot him. No one supports him, and he could have done every single thing right in his career up to that point.
This
right?
guy could have saved a choking Dave just
that morning.
before this call.
Yeah.
He may be a hero officer.
Yeah.
Folks, don't vilify him or vilify the act. He did something because he was untrained, and he rushed to an unreasonable conclusion. And Brian, that's what we do. We do science and reasonableness, and this is a perfect example of an unreasonable response to what a person perceived as a threat. And had he been further trained, I don't see he would.
Because why did he have that response? And I know this is where we get into a little bit of speculation. I mean, expert opinion, but meaning
that's different than speculation.
But we have to go, well, that's why we use the terms likely, or it could have been this.
You're right.
If these things were in place, we don't just say, oh, it must have been this, because get that out of your vocabulary if you're using that, because two greatest words in the English language are prove it.
Exactly. So, and then end each sentence with Your Honor. You know what I'm saying?
So here's the thing, is that obviously, and this has happened before, because he was not one of the first arriving officers on the scene, right?
Yep.
There were a couple officers who arrived there first. They didn't jump to this conclusion. They didn't, not unlike the Stephen Mater case, right? In West Virginia, where he showed up and said,
yes,
this guy just wants me to kill him. This is suicide by cop. I'm not worried about it. I'm going to talk him down. And then the next responding officer was the one who shot and killed him. So not unlike this one, right? And the further we go down now, because now we get into legal matters, and was he negligent? Was it an accident? How does this work? Because he was actually, this now defendant was told by, I believe, his superior hey, I want you on the less than lethal shotgun, not on. And so he had that, and then put that down and drew his sidearm instead. So his only reaction, had something occurred, had he had one, was going to be likely lethal, because of the tool he used to wield in that situation. Would that be like the correct way of looking at it?
That's you're framing it, and I love the way you're framing it. So I would ask you to do one more thing. How many? And I don't know the answer. This isn't rhetorical, so help me. Product of the Detroit school system. How many cards are there in a deck of playing cards?
52.
So I would guess, because this ain't me, folks, so I'm not stringing you. Help along at home. If there's 52 cards in a deck, there's a game called 21 that people call blackjack.
Yep.
Are there people that are professional card counters that can determine the likelihood of what's coming up based on the number of people playing?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So therefore, pardon me. So therefore, I would speculate in this instance that you're going to have some wise-ass attorney that's going to come up, and he's going to conjecture this through and say that, well, there's an infinite number of possibilities that this and that. Horseshit.
No.
There's a very finite number of things that are going to happen. And I go back to my original question, Brian, is it likely with the amount of officers they had on the scene that if the decedent posed a real threat to them, that they would have killed him? They would have been able to kill him with no question before he shot or killed anybody. Because we got to stop this in our society where a cop dies when the suspect dies. That's the kind of math we can't sustain. So therefore, it doesn't fall on all the officers at the scene, but the lawsuit will, and their agency, and vicariously the dispatcher and everybody else. It falls on that officer that took the action, and when he explained his action. Now, remember, this is well after the incident that he's been sworn in and he's testifying in a room full of people for a grand jury. His story is, I just shot. Do you get what I'm trying to say? He didn't bring up, Brian, if he would have brought up and says, I'm an expert in handguns, and trust me, I've had enough suicides that this is the 5th time, and 4 times before, other officers were clipped by the bullet that went through. Brian, if he would have said that, we wouldn't be talking about right now, right?
Yeah,
we would have a body of evidence to draw conclusions from.
If
We don't.
you look at his explanation for his actions, it's a lack of explanation.
Falls short. It falls short.
And that comes from, to me, that says he doesn't know. Like, he doesn't fully understand what happened. Okay, that's a product of training. Meaning he understands the consequences and understands what's happening. Like, not like an idiot. I'm just saying, he like, if you can't articulate why you made a decision, then something happened
after
you don't,
the decision where you've had the time.
You don't know then. You don't really know why you did that. And that's
your memory doesn't get better after the incident. Your memory doesn't improve 4 months after you shot him.
So if he had said, like you said, well, I've been to 37 instances where this occurred, and I saw 16 different times where a bullet went through someone and it hit a police officer or a civilian or whatever, like that, you go, okay. Or if he went the other way and said, you know what, I was F this guy, I'm done, I don't want to be here anymore, this guy wants to die anyway, let's do okay. Though that would explain his actions, but he didn't do either of those things, which means he fell somewhere in the middle.
Wrong or not, you're exactly right, Brian. Whether it was wrong or not, he would have had an explanation. Here, he falls short of describing.
So I'm saying whether it was for a good scientific answer or reason, and there was a legitimate threat that he felt, or it was a horrible, he's just a terrible person. So neither of those things happened, which means it was somewhere in the middle. Meaning, I don't think he understood why. I don't know. Like, that's if you make a decision like that, people have done that before in all kinds of things. Like, I don't know, I just fired, or I don't know, this just happened and can't explain it.
I would have rather him gone down that. I would have rather him gone down and say it was 45 minutes. I don't know what I was thinking. I cranked off a round, and then the next thing I know, now I thought I saw him moving. Brian, that story would have been easier to swallow than this one is. This one, I've been chugging coffee and I can't get it down my throat. Let me tell you a real quick story about drugs. So there was a caper, and I'm reviewing as a supervisor, a drug caper. And the officer's writing in there over and over. He's writing that plain smell, plain feel, which are all accepted and understood exceptions to the search warrant rule.
Meaning
this copper
saw
knew
something
by the
or
balls,
smelled
the shape,
something,
and the felt, and exactly. So this is back when marijuana was voodoo and illegal, and so he's writing this report, and then he contacts the guy, and sure enough, the guy's got like an 8-ball of weed, nothing major, right? But takes him into custody, and then this extrapolates into a search of his vehicle, and then he's now applying for a search warrant to the guy's home, where he feels this big stash is. Nothing in the car, 8-ball in the guy's pocket. We're not talking about possession with intent. But I'm reading this, and I'm suspicious, and I go, okay, right here you said, based on my experience, I know this and that. How many dope cases have you had? Oh, this is my 3rd. Okay, and what was the total amount of the others? All of them, including this one, were going to be under an ounce. Do you get what I'm trying to say? So they were, we're talking less than 28 grams of weed. We're not talking about fentanyl here.
Yeah.
And I go, okay, so you're saying that on the strength of these 3 contacts where you've had less than an ounce of marijuana, you're saying that you knew or should have known this was occurring. That's not enough, Brian. Gladwellian people out in the audience know it takes about 10,000 times to get really good at something. So if you were talking to the subject matter expert that was a weapons, ballistics, guy like that, I give him more credibility. Here you're talking to somebody that's saying, hey, I got 3 dope cases and all of them are this much weed. This copper is on trial for his life. That's the bottom line of this.
Yeah.
And he comes up and goes, I just shot. 1, where's his attorney? Do you get what I'm trying to say? 2, even if it's a Garrity caper and they said, hey, you don't need an attorney, just tell us the truth of what happened. I think that he fell on a file folder and there's nothing written on it, Brian. I think the Rolodex spun and he came up. And guess what we do? Guess what we do when we're less trained? less experience, and have less intellect. We raise the level of violence. Whether we want to, whether we intend to do it or not, we're human, and that's what happens.
Well, that's all humans. That's not law enforcement. I mean,
No,
that doesn't.
and that's
Yeah.
why this ain't a meg episode. If you're a non-law enforcement, this is going to happen. Do you think people don't beat their own kid to death where
Yeah.
they had rage and they started smacking, and then all of a sudden forgot it was a baby human? That happens, Brian.
That
and then when you
happens.
look back, you can't unring that bell. We are fragile little snowflakes, and we make stupid, reprehensible mistakes. And guess what? When the stakes are higher, we make bigger mistakes. And that's what happened here. The stakes were about as high as you can get. And I would ask you this, Brian, how much training you think they did on suicidal subject? It was probably a video chat with a quick test that they had. Do you think that they surrounded a guy? Do you think that they tried to talk to a fellow officer?
But even that, I mean, you got people who then go, well, you need to understand the psychology behind suicidal people, and you need to understand. It's like, okay, well, that doesn't necessarily help you in this situation right here. So all of that stuff behind it, I think, comes down to training, specifically kind of scenario-based training. But
yes, exactly, scenario-based training.
We talk about that, but why don't we? Well, my question is always why are we so bad at taking out the lessons learned? Because I mean, same thing. I've spoken to even recently a very large law enforcement agency, and that was my point. Is like, well, we're not always good at pulling out the lessons learned from these cases, and they were in violent agreement. And these are all seasoned guys who are like, yeah, no, you're right. Like we don't take out, we just make new policies and procedures for if that same incident happens again. Well,
it's not never going to happen.
It's not going to be the same
that way. Let me depose you on that, Brian, because you're onto something. Have you ever been to a training area that was an urban training area that had an overpass? And obviously everybody right now is laughing because they're like, yeah, there was one at every training facility, and everybody knows why, because GLOWOP money, global war on terror money, was everywhere, and everybody had an IDIQ. And the first couple of fatalities from Iraq were from overpasses. Remember those days?
And then they start.
What did they say? Every training area from now on has to have an overpass. Then every training area has to have a bus stop. Then every training. So if you're a trainer at home,
that's we're gonna fight the last war. We're gonna do it. Last TTP.
Exactly, because that guy that designed that, he was actually in a scrum, so we're gonna see it through his eyes. So stop that, first of all. Spend money, Bloomberg. Spend money on training, and you'll get a lot more out of it, and education. So here's a trainer, Brian. Let's do this. These coppers going to go, okay, put your money where your mouth is. So let's get one cop. What's the Sesams round called that coppers use? The less than lethal force munitions.
The sim munitions.
Paintball. Sim munition. Yeah. Okay. So everybody knows that, and all agencies have them. So what we do is clear all weapons, everything, make it safe. Then we get a guy, and we put a red shirt on him, and everybody else has blue shirts. So we put a white shirt on him, everybody else has red shirts. I don't give a shit, but there's some way of determining who this guy is, and that's going to change to other people in the room. And you go, okay, there's only going to be 3 because we only have on-duty or off-duty roll call. And what it's going to be, Brian, is the first time the guy's going to sit there, and no matter what you do, when you take your defensive positions, he's going to shoot himself. The second time, the guy's going to pop up from a kneeling position and race at a cop until it's a suicide by cop. The third time, the guy's going to go, okay, you know what? Set the gun down. Please don't hurt me. I want to go. If they would have done this, Brian, if they would have done just that training, do you understand what I'm saying? This guy would still be alive, and we wouldn't have this copper in a trick bag. How hard would it have been for them to create first part tasks, talk about it, then move into an actual scenario-based training like that? And now when you the Rolodex is spinning, you fall on that one, and it's like, we had the cat lady on here telling you folks to make index cards for a person that needs sign language to tell them calm down, all is well. Did you do it? Because if you didn't, then guess what? You looked the training in the eye and you chose a different path. Brian, this guy is guilty of being stupid in the moment and exacerbating that stupidity later by not having an explanation that's reasonable enough for me to buy into it. And thank God I'm not on a jury, and certainly thank God I'm not doing the deposition on this, because I would have laughed at that point and poked him. I would have poked him and said, there's got to be something. I would have squeezed him and said, what else do you got inside of you? Because that blows.
So if this guy is, guilty of making a poor decision in a stressful situation, I mean, then the training, you just get away from the training part of this, right? We're going to vilify this guy. He's the one that made the mistake, because we don't, want to accept responsibility, right? Meaning the whole department, the training
He's the
process, the
first guy
academy.
at that scene that made the mistake. His
Right.
just happened to be bigger, Brian, right?
Well, yeah. And what about everything leading up to that? I mean, this is the
Exactly.
thing. You know, it's not just him; it's the department, that agency, it's their academy, it's the funding that they get from taxpayers, it's policymakers who say, no, we don't want the police to do this, or we want them to do that. And then it's us, every single member of society. It's a shared responsibility, right? I sent you that photo that was I took right down the street from where I live, where someone had
Right.
graffiti where it said, society gets the type of graffiti it deserves, or something like that. And
Yep.
that's why I was like, no, society gets the type of law enforcement it deserves. I mean, meaning
Yep.
if this is what you want, I think there's the bigger picture here too is what is the role they're supposed to play? Because here's the thing, it's like a suicidal person. Why is that so now police
Why
are
on this case? You're
well,
exactly right, Brian. Your
so
instincts are correct here.
but police are mental health experts. That's what their job is, to go in and talk people down from suicide. That's what they're supposed to do. Okay,
Okay.
so we want them to do that. But
They're
then there's all this
first
other.
responders, buddy. You got
But
it. You're onto something here.
but then why? You know what I mean? I don't feel that we're taking a large enough view at all these cases and changing it, because anytime, any call, I don't care what it is, anytime where the police or military, whatever, anyone has to show up that is part of a government agency, that's resources we're allocating towards this situation. And we're saying, okay, we have to use these resources here, which means we're taking it away from somewhere else. So I think people don't realize that, hey, if you want everyone to do this now, then something else isn't going to get done. So
Yes.
we have to decide what's important to us as a role in society. So did this guy need to die? Well, no, I don't think he did. We value life
Even
is
at his own
valued.
hand, folks. Even at his own hand, he didn't need to die.
We in general we have a very high value on life here in the United States and in most in North America in general, right? We're not a third world country. We don't live in some of the places that you and I run around in. Life is very, very important here. It's important everywhere, but
Yep.
here we take we're very lucky that we live in a society that values someone's life so highly. So why do we
Right.
not why don't we take out the right lessons learned? Like, why does that and because that's the big thing from all these cases that I see, because to us, I know it's the same thing. We have to explain a lot to people how we look at it from the lens of human behavior and go, look,
Yes.
all of these cases come down to a core skill set that we need to understand or get better at.
Guess what?
But
The gold standard is that center link in the chain that everything comes from.
But why do you think, from your experience, both military, law enforcement, working with the military? I mean, we've been at war for 20 years. Why are we so bad at getting the correct lessons learned? Because every once in a while we get it right, or we come up, there's some good training that they go, hey, this is what we need to focus on. Or why are we so
Simple
bad
answer.
at doing that? Why doesn't the police come out and say, hey, look, this is a failure in training. Yes, this guy made a horrible decision and someone was killed. That's the line of work that we're in. What do you do for a living? So don't judge us. You screw up.
That would be an interesting conversation.
I mean, you can't have that conversation.
Yeah, I can see the PIO right there with pointing too. But you're right.
Here's the thing: is when the restaurant screws up your order, it's, hey, I'm sorry, and they go fix it, and you don't have to pay for that. This is a similar thing. The guy screwed up something.
It's more than similar, Brian.
But
so let's do
you
this.
get what I'm saying? Meaning I understand that the risk is much higher and everything.
Yeah,
but
you just coined it. So let's talk about risk first of all. Let's step one back away from training, one back away from lesson learned, and go to the risk first. Don't show up at a debate with a gun. Don't show up at a voting booth with a gun. Don't show up to talk to the cop that's knocking on your door with a gun. Why? Because it's risky behavior. And when you engage in risky behavior, there's always a chance you're going to get shot. Now, let's go to 2. When a police officer pulls you over, 10 and 2, roll down a window and say yes, sir, a lot, or yes, ma'am. Don't be reaching for stuff. Don't put the pernal and drive. Why? Because that's risky behavior. And if you scare a cop or a guard at the border or somebody else, you might die. So we could categorize all of that, Brian, and that's what I call common sense, okay? The idea is that you don't want to be the proximate cause of your own homicide by escalating the situation knowingly or unknowingly by being lippy and bringing a weapon.
Right. But
there's laws to fix that later.
Yeah.
Now, you as a citizen are responsible part of that. So the decedent here brought a gun to a debate, and he
Right.
shouldn't have, but he was a fractured
I-
human, and somebody should have saw it. That's the
I,
first
I,
part.
I get that. He's in my opinion, he's at fault for everything that happened. Right, he is the cause of all this. He's the cause of this.
He put
He's his own death. He caused his own death. Plain and simple. That person. I forget his name already because I don't really care about.
I think
that.
it was Evans, isn't it?
Evans, yeah. So Mr. Evans, unfortunately, had struggling with whatever he was struggling with. He caused his own death when he decided to call the police.
I would say he put.
Or,
I would say he put the series of events into motion.
Yeah, absolutely.
That ended with his death. I would agree with that.
Absolutely. So I'm not.
So no. So
saying
but,
that,
but what
but-
I'm telling you is, if we acquiesce to that, now let's go on to the lessons learned. Humans are set on transmit.
Yeah. Okay.
If you have two radios facing each other, both set on transmit, what do you get?
A lot
You
of
get
noise.
feedback and static and noise.
Yep.
But do you ever get anywhere? No, you don't. So what's happening here is we have to say, not all information in an agency is pushed down. Thou shalt learn this. You shall do that. Because what that doesn't do is that doesn't create an opportunity for learning to occur. Training allows for learning to occur. For a human being to get knowledge, skills, attitudes, aptitudes, abilities that they didn't have before. And when a person falls on the blank Rolodex, then guess what? It's a crapshoot. Anything goes. And that's what happened in this situation. So when we do this, what we should do is there should be a nation wide law enforcement
but that's I'm not
video that comes out where somebody from the U.S. State Department,
right, but that's
or
what
the U.S. Department of Justice.
I get all that, but I'm asking a general question from your experience or your lifetime. It's not these, hey, this is what we should do in this case. I'm saying, why are we so bad at extracting the lessons learned, and why do we just want to put blame on someone who? I would say if you're going to blame someone, blame Mr. Evans, right? He's the one who set
you're
this
wrong.
chain
And
of events.
that's a great point. The thing we got to blame is we blame the supervisors because it's always an administration problem and a training problem. So Evans didn't know critical thinking skills, because if he had, he would have called 911. He's a first responder. He wanted to talk it out. All the evidence points to the fact that he wanted to have his say. He didn't want to have his way. And if he was going to hurt somebody, it was going to be self-inflicted. And guess what? Those people around him were put into that situation because of Evans. I'll agree with that. But they weren't trained to a level where they could take it. And guess what? They could have done a handoff. I always call it having a plan B, Brian. If I could have dropped the hammer on everybody that legally I could have killed, you could find me by the trail of my corpses. You're the same, everybody that's in this shop. But we chose to de-escalate. We chose to find some common ground less than killing the person. And that includes in getting into the gray area of shooting a tire at the end of a chase to disable the vehicle, because you didn't want to have to shoot the driver. And you know what? Maybe that's murky, and maybe some people go, well, there's laws against it. But I understand a thought process that says, at least I'm not killing the guy, right? Now, that goes in the face of most people, because when it comes to a lessons learned, the idea is that exact specific thing is never going to happen again. So that's why you've got to have training that equates certain things. Like training for sexual harassment is very similar to training for suicidal behavior identification. Domestic violence. Am I lying?
And that's kind of what I was thinking too, is what it gets down to is we become then, okay, this is now another skill I have to learn. So that department is going to go, hey, we got this psychologist person who's going to come in and talk about this and how to.
And all we're going to do is EDPs, emotionally disturbed people.
Yeah. We're going to spend this much time focusing on just this one thing.
Yep. And by the way, now we can't hire a school resource officer because we don't have the funds, right?
Am
I lying?
Yes. And now we're going to spend this much money on this one thing. And you're going, all right, but aren't there some common themes throughout all of these that we can boil it down to?
That's the point, Brian. And that's why we have to spend more time listening to our training division and looking at the news and saying, forecasting out ahead of us. So school resource officer just brought that up. So kid brings a sharpened set of forks for the grill, barbecue grill fork, that big thing that you got. Brings that, brings it under his coat.
Wisconsin or no?
Exactly. Goes in, school resource officer starts stabbing him, school resource officer, because his intent was that I'm going to take the gun, shoot a bunch of my peers, and kill myself.
Right.
I didn't want to kill the officer, but I certainly did want to disarm him.
But I needed his gun. Yeah.
Exactly. And he was kind of stopping and getting in the way.
And
So
I'm
Copper's
laughing
response-
at this, but it's not meaning it's the gallows humor. This is how people.
But
this is
it's
how they
worse
think.
than that. It's exactly how do you do that, right?
Yeah.
So now the copper draws his weapon to fire fatal rounds into the person that is trying to kill him, and he's justified in doing that. And he shoots himself. The copper shoots himself as he shoots and wounds the kid, and now they de-escalate the situation. He shot himself, Brian. Okay,
Yeah.
and somebody's going to go, hey, there was pandemonium. Of course he shot himself. No, shut up. It's a function of training. Okay, look, just like every department, and your department too, whatever you do and wherever you work, your department has it where you go, well, don't send Tim. He'll turn everybody high and right, and there'll be a fist fight at the end of it. Don't give it to Tammy. Tammy doesn't give a shit, and she's not going to do a good job. Brian, does every agency you've ever seen or ever worked for have that?
Every company has that.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't give it to so-and-so down at HR. Go to this person.
So what does that mean? That means we're accepting failed to thrive behavior. Are we not?
That's the thing.
We're lowering the bar.
When you say that, you're accepting that behavior. You're now.
If you walk by it, you've accepted it.
You're complicit in whatever comes of that because
that's what I'm saying.
And that's what when some of these are be, oh, wow, we all knew that was going to happen. Well, why didn't you motherfuckers do something about it beforehand? And and I got to teach.
So you just answered your own question. I want you to make sure you get that. I know you were posing a semi-rhetorical, but Brian, you reap the whirlwind. When you don't conduct this training, when you don't understand there's commonality between all training, when you don't have that Bayesian style and you don't require the people to, and then if you don't interact with your folks, they're going to create their own groove in the record. And guess what? It's hard to get out of that. And this kid did. And it ended up in him shooting a suicidal subject. Completely different if the kid was running toward him, waving a gun around. Completely different.
Yeah, and that goes. It just the parallels are everywhere, right? We were talking about this case, but we got to start doing some cases on like corporate things that happen because
You're exactly
it's no
right.
different because I always have
Brian,
to tell
we always think that the corporation will go, he's not talking about coppers, he's talking about my company. But
No,
you know what, Brian? Maybe they don't.
Oh, I got
that.
McKaylee's the perfect example. Like I've just we share the office and I've heard some of her phone calls and I hear a speaker and I'm like, oh my God, this guy. Or I hear what she's trying to figure stuff out. She's like, no one showed at a new company. So she's only worked for these big companies that are freaking huge. I'm talking, they're paying her really good money. And so it was like the last one where she
Thank God, because we're not making any.
So she became the top salesperson in her team, and that took a year, and then she was like just blowing everyone away. And because they just, you got to figure it out. You got to figure out. I was like, no one's training you. No one's saying, hey, do this, do this. It's like, no, like it. So she had to go. So that means that company lost a year of productivity, paying her money where she could have been making them more. And then she goes to the next even bigger company. This is huge. I'm not saying I knew who it is, but same thing. I'm like, are they doing that? No. She's like, no one's showing me. It's in the same space. So I said, I had to work with her and go, all right, you're going to come up with a training plan for yourself. She's like, what do you mean? I go, all right, here's what you're going to do. Close targets first, figure out what you need to learn right now. All right. And get really good at that. Don't worry about the rest of the stuff. Then as you have time, start building in. We came up with a little training plan for her. Sure enough, she's 3 months in and she's already hitting her numbers, doing this, like, and it's like because no one did that. So that means all those companies are losing out on
past an opportunity,
millions and millions and millions of dollars of revenue because they don't want to invest in their people. Now they'll go on LinkedIn and do the, hey, one CEO says to his CFO, what if we don't train our people or something like, or we say, what if we train our people and they all end up leaving us? And the guy says, hey, what if we don't train them and they end up staying?
That's the scariest thing I can imagine.
But everyone posts that crap and no one does
about that. Brian, two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
You said engage your close targets first. There's logic behind that. Tactically, operationally, strategically, we could break that down and show why. What's the difference between that and check your 5 and 25s when you take a knee? Because the thing that might kill you might be the thing that's right around you. What we're talking about is there's certain tenets of wisdom that come back over and over and over. And whether it's the Tao of Pu, the Taya Piglet, whether it's Lao Tzu, whether it's a gosh darn Carnegie, talking about business, they apply to all humans. All humans are forms of tribes that have groups, and those groups either produce or they don't. And when teams are always looking down and in, they're never going to come up and out. Those things that are going up and out will have wobbly legs and will always crash down. We're talking about a function of training within an organization. And when you lapse at that training or you lack that training, or you give people too much. Look, I'm all about critical thinking skills, but saying I set my less than lethal force alternative next to me and I turned on my camera, when I read that, what is that? That's procedure. That's checking the box. Checking the box training doesn't make me think myself out of a situation, and critical thinking does. So if your training components don't have a why did you do that because of this, if they don't have a hot wash, if they don't have a lessons learned, and if your agency doesn't grow from that, then don't come back to me and go, hey, we're getting sued again. Hey, U.S. Justice Department has fallen in on our agency. The actions of one person are spinning this agency
Yeah.
into a horrific situation, but it could have been predicted, and then it would have been completely intentional, not a mistake like this to cost somebody their life. And it'll have repercussions months and years after this incident, and it's going to cost people a bunch of money. Pay up front. You're going to pay one way or the other.
Well,
So pay up front, pay for the training, pay as much as you can for the training,
well,
and you're going to get a much bigger investment.
and that goes to kind of what I was talking about as society as a whole and how we look at some of these issues, whether that's at a corporation or what we want for law enforcement is that's your people forget you're always going to pay. No
One way
matter
or the
what.
other, buddy.
This is how it works. You pay, right? It's like taxes, right? You're gonna pay. So you have to do it. So you can try and minimize as much as you're gonna get a really good CPA, do whatever you got to do. But meaning it's the same analogy. Like you're going to pay. So how do you want to do it? Do you want to wait till something catastrophic happens and pay a whole crap ton of money, or do you want to pay a
It's
little bit?
so simple.
But
It's so simple.
it's investing for your future, right? Everyone knows.
And you
Look,
get the best return on your investment by reinforcing this, not this.
Everyone knows, if you get a 401k and you put a little bit away, right? You start right now today, right? Even just starting today, a little bit at a time, a little bit upfront. Well, what's going to happen 30, 40 years from now? Well, that's going to pay off dividends, huge.
Training is an investment in your cognitive capital.
Try to wait 40 years and make that same amount.
Then you're going to be dumping lump sums in, and you don't know what's going to happen. Maybe you're not going to live that long. So the idea is that absolutely everything you do, and much more importantly, that which you do not do is going to come back to haunt you. If your agency isn't doing hip pocket training, if it's not doing on-duty roll call and after-duty hot wash, your off-duty roll call, talking about it, if you're not spending a few minutes prepping people to go out on the road, then these things are going to continue to happen.
Yeah, and I think I don't think it takes as much as people think in terms of calorie.
Brian, Brian, a 5-minute on-duty or off-duty.
I'll put
wash about.
And I'll put up some of that on the pay site. Some of the stuff we're talking about.
Yeah. Hey, do me a favor, Brian. Do a couple of our lessons learned, or rather, our instructor evals. Put that on the pay site.
Okay.
So they can see that
how you take it out.
Message. Do you get what I'm trying to say? And it could be that one focused thing. Hey, remember what this means. Hey, today when you go out there, because now we're laser focused on going out there, but we didn't lose our flashlight. You can't have one or the other, Brian. You have to have both. Look, Copper's got a gun on his side. He's got a gun at his ankle. He's got a gun in a holster in his car. He's got a sniper rifle in his trunk, and he's got a 911 to call all the other guys with guns. If that's all you got, guess what? You approach every problem with that mentality. We got to spend at least as much time driving because you're driving more than you're shooting, and 10 times that amount talking. And I know the number is probably higher than that because you talk more than you're driving when you're a copper. And this writing too. I tell you what, I'd love to have some sort of course in testimony afterwards. Where was his supervisor going? No, whatever you do, Johnny, the last thing I want you to do is say, I shot, I just shot. Because that case went, right out the window.
No, we make that joke all the time, especially who wants to write the report. It's like that's actually the most important thing. It's the most important thing that happened today. You writing that down and making a
legal,
note.
Moral, and ethical conduct, and accurately reporting it. Because witnesses eyeball, witnesses blow. Brian, you know that caper, the pizza box caper, everybody's calling it in my world. All the witnesses said it was a young boy that was shot in the back running from coppers, and all the videos and all the evidence show the guy aggressively with the gun, and he's a man. He's in his 20s. Why, Brian? Because eyeball witnesses are the worst. Here we got a case where we don't need an eyeball witness, and the only eyeball witness we did have is dead, and the copper comes in completely unprepared and says, hey, me and Ramos, man, I was looking out for us. Not against coppers, love coppers. They've got the hardest job in the world, folks. But the idea is that one bad thing like this gives us all a black eye, and we don't need it. This is all about cognitive overmatch. It's about learning good strategies and thinking clearly in horrific situations so we don't have to use deadly force.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's kind of a good place to
There's no good one
bring
on
for
this one.
Lanny. No. We can bring up the pizza box one. I think that's a whole separate one if we wanted to. But
Yeah,
um,
let's leave it for a future caper. Everybody do your homework. Go look up what I just said, and I'll challenge you to be on our next show. We'll talk about it, Brian and I.
yeah. So appreciate everyone listening. Thanks again. Go ahead, check out that Patreon site, but don't forget that training.
Hey, Marin, the John McCaskill podcast. I'm sorry, I know you're leaving. Miss McCaskill, good guy. Put that one up, and I got to do a shout out, folks. There's a great one coming. Wait till you get a hold of Nikki Selby.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that this one is after Nikki's, so they can check that one out already. Go back one. All right. Don't forget, everyone, training changes behavior.